Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something significant, a journey back to a pivotal and often pretty turbulent moment in African history.
That's right. We're talking about the birth of Kenya as a nation, specifically those first crucial years, roughly 1963 to 1969.
Exactly. It's this period where you see the incredible hopes of self-rule clashing almost immediately with some, well, deep-seated divisions. And this groundwork laid right at the start really shaped the country for decades.
It absolutely did. And our mission today really is to unpack chapters 1 and 2 of Daniel Branch's book, Kenya, Between Hope and Despair, 1963-2011. It's a fantastic source.
It really is.
We want to pull out the most important nuggets, the key insights from these foundational years. Think of it as a shortcut for you to understand the complex forces shaping independent Kenya.
We'll look at the key leaders, the big policy decisions, and some of those unexpected events that were often quite tragic, actually.
Yeah. So Kenya's independence, it was this whirlwind, right? Immense hope, huge celebrations, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
But underneath, right from the get-go, there were these immediate, deeply entrenched tensions.
So we're going to explore how those early decisions, things like governance structure, land reform, even how Kenya positioned itself internationally, weren't just isolated choices.
No, they actively forged the nation's DNA, so to speak.
It's like looking at the blueprint, isn't it? This isn't just reciting facts. We want to understand the why behind Kenya's complex path.
Exactly. We're diving deep into the origins of modern Kenya.
Okay, so let's start right there. June 1963, that electrifying moment, the official dawn of Kenya's self-rule, or Madaraka.
A huge moment, not just a date on the calendar, but the real symbolic start of the post-colonial era, full of possibility.
Yeah, just unbridled joy for so many. And Daniel Branch, he captures this atmosphere really vividly. He talks about Odinga's party,
Ah, yes, that famous party.
a massive celebration. Branch says it marked three connected, really momentous events. The first, obviously, was self-rule itself on June 1st.
Which was the crucial first step. Full independence followed in December, and then becoming a republic a year later. But June 1st was the kickoff.
Right. So what were the other two big reasons for that specific celebration at Odinga's place?
Okay, so the second big thing they were celebrating was Kenyu's decisive election victory just before that, in late May.
KNU being the Kenya African National Union.
Correct. They won against their main rivals, KADU, the Kenya African Democratic Union. And this wasn't just, one party beating another.
It was more fundamental.
Much more. It was a victory for a specific vision for Kenya. KNU wanted a strong, centralized government, power concentrated in Nairobi, basically.
Yeah, drive development from the center.
Exactly. Whereas KAU, they'd argued for a devolved system, Majimbo, with more power pushed out to the regions, to local authorities.
But KNU winning meant centralization won out right from the start.
So pretty much immediately, yeah. And that decision, favoring central control, set a precedent that would echo for decades. Power consolidated early.
Okay, and the third reason for Odinga's party, more personal for him.
It was definitely personal for Odinga. The third event was his own triumphant return to the top tier of Kenyan politics.
Because he'd been sidelined before?
He had. He'd been deliberately kept out of the cabinet under a previous sort of fragile power-sharing deal forced by the British. But with KNU winning outright, controlling the main government institutions, Odinga was back in. Big time. He became Minister for Home Affairs.
So you see this blueprint forming almost instantly. Centralized power, key figures taking key roles.
Right, and this swift move towards centralization, almost instinctively it seems, is crucial. It tells you a lot about the direction Kenya was heading, even in those first few days. Consolidate first, figure out the details later, perhaps.
It certainly set a powerful tone. Okay, let's talk about the leaders themselves. This ensemble gathered at Odinga's party. Branch calls them figures whose disputes and ideas would dominate for a generation. Who was really at the heart of it?
Well, undoubtedly, front and center was Jomo Kenyatta, Vimzi, the elder, or Baba Taifa, father of the nation. His authority was, pretty much undisputed by this point.
Especially after his release from detention back in '61.
Exactly. Years locked up by the British over Mau Mau, accusations many felt were false. Branch describes him as still robust, commanding. He was the symbol, the figurehead who'd returned to lead.
And then there was Odinga himself, the host, described as one of KNU's dynamos.
A key ally of Kenyatta's at this stage, a powerful speaker. Though Branch hints may be less interested in the nitty-gritty of governing once Kenyatta was firmly in charge.
Interesting. And Slightly oddly, perhaps, Malcolm MacDonald was there.
Yeah, the last British colonial governor who then became the first High Commissioner.
His presence tells a story, doesn't it? About Britain's lingering influence, maybe.
It certainly does. He played a key, if sometimes behind-the-scenes, role in shaping decolonization. But yeah, many African nationalists were deeply suspicious of him, saw him as a symbol of continued, neo-colonial ties.
Understandably. And the fourth key figure.
Tom Mboya, the brilliant strategist, and notably the youngest of this core group.
Right. Branch calls him outstandingly modern.
He really was. Sharp intellect, honed during his time in trade union politics back in the 50s, which was a tough school.
Definitely.
He became this articulate voice for moderate nationalism, equally at home, talking to dock workers in Mombasa or, high-flying diplomats in London or New York. Very versatile, very strategic.
What strikes you immediately is the mix, isn't it? The generational differences, the ideological shades, all on the same platform, at least initially.
Absolutely. Kenyatta represented that older struggle, going way back to the 1920s. Mboya was the younger, maybe more globally connected generation.
And it's crucial to remember, isn't it, that Mboya and Odinga, despite their later rivalry, were the guys who actually built Konano initially.
That's a key point. They were the organizers, the engine room. Before Kenyatta was released and took over the leadership, they stepped aside for him.
So a complex dynamic already. And they weren't the only ones there, right? There were other key figures.
No, definitely not alone. There were key assistants celebrating, too. People like Fred Kubai, Mwai Kibaki, who, of course, would later lead Kenya.
Right.
King Oneko, Paul Ngei. And what's important here is some of these guys, Oneko, Kubai, and Ngei, along with Bildad Kagia, they were known as the strongmen of militant nationalism in the 50s.
So more radical views than Kenyatta.
Oh, much more forthright views on what independence should deliver, especially compared to the more conciliatory Kenyatta. Waniko was interesting, very close to both Kenyatta and Odinga, a skillful political navigator.
So you have this mix, elder statesman, younger strategist, former militants, ideological differences simmering. What does that tell us about the unity of the new government? How real was it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Branch notes that despite the feasting and celebrating, which projected this image of seriousness and unity,
the foreign diplomats were impressed, apparently.
They were. The U.S. diplomat called it a huge success. But Duncan Ndegwa, he later became head of the civil service, head of the central bank. Looking back, he called that unity transient.
Transient. That's a really telling word for such a hopeful moment.
It's incredibly insightful. Ndegwa basically argued that the only thing truly uniting Kenyu's leadership at independence was getting rid of the British. Simple as that. Opposition to colonialism.
So it wasn't a deep agreement on the future.
Ndegwa believed they had no choice but to present a united front. They had to, in his words, temporarily bury their differences to eject an oppressive minority.
Which implies those differences were still there, just beneath the surface.
Exactly. Ideological splits, ethnic tensions, economic disagreements. They weren't resolved, just submerged, waiting. It was a pragmatic alliance against a common enemy, not necessarily a shared positive vision for Kenya itself.
And you see this pattern elsewhere, don't you, in post-colonial history?
All the time. Independence movements born from fighting against something often struggle to define what they're fighting for once the enemy's gone.
Finding that unified path forward is the real challenge.
Absolutely. The fight against colonialism united them, but the fight for Kenya's future, that was going to expose all those buried differences. Kenya, right from the start, seems a classic, perhaps tragic example of this.
Okay, so independence achieved, the party's over. Now the hard work begins, charting Kenya's future.
And in Kenya, given its economy, land was everything, absolutely central to any development plan.
So Kenyatta's stance on land is really interesting here. You might expect a radical break, but it wasn't quite like that, was it?
Not at all. Despite, the widespread calls to give land back to landless Africans and his own public sympathy for them, Kenyatta's actual approach was surprisingly conservative.
He did say things like, back in '61, my only concern is the landless Africans. Government must do something to find them a place to live. That sounds sympathetic.
It does, but then you look at what he told the European settlers they were trying to reassure.
Right. He said, I regard titles as a private property and they must be respected. Pretty clear.
Unequivocal. He explicitly ruled out nationalization, ruled out compulsory purchase of foreign-owned assets. He even told his own Kanenu MPs in '64 that nationalization wouldn't advance African socialism, his term for his vision.
So stability over radical change.
That seems to be the priority. His approach aimed for high economic growth, yes, but through individual effort, hard work, attracting foreign investment, and crucially, protecting private property rights.
Not through wholesale redistribution from the rich settlers to the poor landless.
Exactly. It set a very clear, you could say, pro-capitalist tone right from the beginning, prioritizing continuity, especially in land ownership, over the kind of radical break many had fought and hoped for.
Which must have been deeply disappointing for some, especially those who fought in Mau Mau expecting land reform.
Hugely disappointing for many. And crucially, this conservative vision wasn't even universally shared within Canoe itself.
Back to Ndegwa's transient unity.
Precisely. There were fundamentally different ideas about what development should even mean for Kenya.
So Kenyatta had his growth-led model, individual effort, foreign cash, hoping it trickles down.
Right. Then you had Tom Mboya. He also believed in growth, but he saw things differently long term. He thought a profound redistribution of wealth would eventually be necessary.
So for Mboya, it was a matter of when, not if.
Seems so. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you had Odinga Odinga.
What was his take?
Odinga wanted immediate action, direct redistribution of European-owned land straight to the landless peasants. He saw that as the quickest way to benefit the poorest.
So a real ideological battle within the ruling party, even before the dust settled on independence.
Absolutely. It shows just how deep those divisions Ndegwa talked about really were. That transient unity was already under serious strain from these competing economic visions for Kenya's soul, really.
And these weren't new arguments that just popped up in 1963, were they? They had roots in the colonial past.
Deep roots. Branch describes the final years of colonial rule as a land of commotion, a real surge in African political activity after World War II.
What were the main grievances driving that?
A whole range. In the cities, workers were fed up with low wages, terrible housing. In rural areas, anger flared over new colonial development projects that often displaced people or put pressure on land.
And the farms?
European farms were mechanizing, kicking out African laborers who'd worked there for generations. Mass expulsions.
And with formal political parties often banned or restricted.
These grievances found other outlets. Militant trade unionism exploded in the cities. Religious sects offered solace and sometimes resistance in rural areas.
And of course, Mau Mau.
The Mau Mau insurgency, yeah. Exploding in '52, mainly among the Kikuyu in Central Province, in Nairobi's poorer areas, and on those white-owned farms. Driven by land issues, marginalization, economic hardship, a really complex and brutal conflict.
So the point is, the challenges independent Kenya faced weren't brand new. They were inherited.
Exactly. Deeply rooted in colonial injustices, unmet aspirations, especially around land and opportunity. The fault lines were already there, sown long before Independence Day. You couldn't just wave a flag and make them disappear.
Okay, so Kenyu's in power, and one of their first moves is what?
They immediately started dismantling the devolved constitution, the Majimbo system, that they'd reluctantly agreed to with KDU before independence.
And that wasn't smooth sailing.
Far from it. Branch calls it a fraught process. You had local authorities briefly feeling their power, trying to assert themselves.
And issues at the new regional borders.
Big issues. Communities with historical ties across these new lines found themselves cut off, alienated. This immediately sparked really sensitive debates about ethnic ownership of land. Places like Timau near Mount Kenya became flashpoints.
And here's where the political strategy gets interesting, and maybe a bit cynical.
Extremely interesting, and yes, arguably cynical. Instead of tackling the core issue, many Kenyans cared about redistribution of resources, land, wealth.
Which was the expectation.
Right. The leadership, especially Kenyatta's circle, began shifting the debate. They encouraged politics to focus on recognition, which basically became a code word for ethnicity.
A diversion tactic.
It seems like a deliberate tactic, yeah. To crush demands for redistribution, as Branch puts it, by playing up tribal loyalties and grievances instead.
So much for tribalism becoming just a historic memory, as Mugugadru hoped.
Tragically forlorn, as Branch notes. The very constitutional structure meant to organize the new nation became a tool to manage, and you could argue, deepen ethnic tensions for political advantage. A really significant and damaging shift.
And while this internal restructuring was happening, there were external pressures too. Conflicts.
Oh, yes. Despite the national motto Harambee Pull Together and things like multiracial celebrations in Lamu, a serious, low-intensity war was raging in the north.
The Shifta War.
Exactly, lasting until 1967. And this wasn't minor. Nearly 2,000 Shifta, the term the government used for the insurgents, were killed.
Kenyatta tried to say they were Somalis from Somalia, didn't he?
He did. He publicly challenged anyone to show him a dead raider to prove they were Kenyan. But the reality was, they were overwhelmingly Kenyans. Somalis, yes, but also some Turkana.
And what were they fighting against?
Fundamentally, they feared the new state. They feared statecraft that would restrict movement and impose an unprecedented level of state regulation on their traditional, often nomadic ways of life. They felt completely marginalized.
And this wasn't new, right? The MPPPP had already pushed for secession.
Absolutely. The Northern Province People's Progressive Party won huge support among Somalis in a 1961 referendum backing secession. That shows the depth of feeling there.
What were the roots of that feeling?
It went deep. Ideas of Somali unification played a part, sure. But critically, it was about decades, centuries even, of neglect and prejudice, first by the colonial state and then, sadly, continued by the post-colonial one.
How did that prejudice manifest?
You had administrators, both colonial and Kenyan, dismissing Somalis as idle or caring more for stock than their children, just demeaning stereotypes. And development was deliberately held back. By 1967, only 2 secondary schools in that entire vast region.
Wow.
So even after the main fighting stopped around 68, insecurity remained. Many Somalis felt zero connection to Kenya. They felt the government just doesn't care if we live or die.
A recipe for long-term disaffection.
Absolutely. A deep spar, showing how central power could just ignore the periphery with devastating consequences.
And beyond these internal conflicts, Kenya gets caught up in the Cold War.
Right in the middle of it. And this really shaped things, contributing, some argue, to strong anti-democratic tendencies in the government.
How so? What triggered that?
Well, the Zanzibar Revolution in January 64 was a huge wake-up call.
Because next door.
Exactly. It showed Kenyan leaders, and crucially their Western allies in London and Washington, how quickly discontented groups could rise up, potentially fueled by external ideologies.
Seen as a communist takeover bid.
Kenyan intelligence certainly saw it that way. A straight bid by the communists, they concluded. This ramped up the paranoia about Soviet influence significantly.
And Odinga wasn't exactly hiding his connections.
Not at all. Odinga was openly friendly with communist powers, saw them as bonds of friendship. His scholarship program was a big example.
Sending more students to communist countries than Maboya sent to the U.S.
Significantly more, nearly 1,900 by 1965. This gave Odinga a lot of political patronage, built his base, but it massively worried Western diplomats and Kenyan intelligence.
They thought it was more than just education.
They genuinely believed many students got military training aimed at the violent overthrow of non-communist governments. They even pointed to a specific group sent to China for military training before independence.
So this raises a big question. How much did these Cold War fears actually drive Kenya's internal politics? The suppression of dissent.
It's a crucial question. British interests were huge in Kenya investments, settler farms, concerns about migration. This led directly to defense agreements.
Providing support to Kenyatta.
Yes, financial and military support against threats, internal or external, which meant a very visible British military presence. This obviously bolstered Kenyatta's position, his centralizing push, and served Western strategic interests in the region.
So independence wasn't quite independence in a way, still caught in these global power games.
It shows how complex sovereignty is, doesn't it? Even after the flag goes up, these external pressures, these global currents can be incredibly powerful, almost suffocating sometimes. True national autonomy remained very much contested.
So within just a couple of years, these cracks in the foundation, they start to look more like, well, gaping chasms.
They really do, and things turn violent. The assassination of Kyogama Pinto in February 1965 is a really stark early example.
A chilling moment. Tell us about Pinto.
He was Nairobi-born, of Goan descent, a truly brilliant strategist, Branch calls him, fearless advocate for radical nationalism, fought injustice relentlessly, came up through trade unions, helped found KANU's newspaper, Saudi Ya KANU.
So a key player in the independence movement.
Absolutely. Described as youthful and energetic, darting like an antelope. He'd also done time in detention during Mau Mau, seen colonial brutality up close.
And his murder. Was it ever really solved?
Well, a man named Kiselu Mutua was convicted, but he always maintained his innocence. Even after release, years later, the whole thing was immediately swamped with rumors.
Such as?
Persistent whispers about U.S. involvement because Pinto was seen as close to Odinga and had alleged communist links. Whether true or not, the point is this assassination, just 2 years in, set a terrifying precedent.
Signaling that politics could be deadly.
Exactly. That disputes might not be settled with words. It cast a real chill over anyone thinking of speaking out too forcefully.
Then, just a couple of months later, April 65, the Soviet ship arrives. The Fizik Lebedev.
Right. Carrying weapons and military advisors. It was actually part of a deal agreed back in '64.
But the timing was bad. Or opportunistic.
Both, probably.
Yeah.
It immediately got linked, maybe conveniently, to coup rumors, amplified by external powers hostile to Soviet influence.
And the British leaned heavily on Kenyatta.
Immensely. The British High Commission pressured him intensely. Reject the arms, they said, or you risk jeopardizing our defense agreements, which were vital for Kenya's military at the time.
And Kenyatta.
He complied. He publicly ordered the ship away, dismissing the arms very colorfully as old, secondhand, and no use to Kenya's modern army. Someone even joked they were museum pieces from the Russian Revolution.
It's quite a performance.
It is, but it vividly shows the continued leverage Britain had. The power of a former colonial master, even after independence, to influence major Kenyan decisions, foreign and domestic. True sovereignty, again, looking pretty fragile.
So these external pressures are swirling. But internally, there's growing unhappiness too, right, with Kenyatta's whole development strategy.
Absolutely. The official government line was all progress and unity Harambee. But beneath that, popular discontent was real and widespread, even in Kenyatta's Kikuyu heartlands.
You have examples.
Branch mentions Willie Kamumba, a Mau Mau veteran in Nairobi. He was asking, what is this Uru, this independence, actually doing for ordinary people? He felt the government wasn't reaching the grassroots, a real sense of betrayal.
And the story from Nyeri.
Kariuki Kagunda. His homes were destroyed for a new coffee facility, apparently without proper compensation. He was furious, accused Kenyatta of helping money instead of people, and controversially called ministers harlots. That's raw anger.
It shows a real disconnect. But Kenyans didn't necessarily want formal socialism, did they?
That's the paradox. You saw protests against communism germs at rallies. But as Robert Bates noted, ordinary Kenyans did expect tangible benefits from independence. They wanted higher incomes, wealth, prosperity, investment opportunities, just quicker and maybe more fairly distributed than Kenyatta's model was delivering.
So the government's approach wasn't meeting those immediate aspirations.
Not for many. And this gap between policy and popular expectation just sowed more seeds of discontent, setting the stage for real opposition.
And politically, Kenyatta was moving to consolidate his power during this time.
Ruthlessly. The merger of KDU into KNU in '64 was a key move.
How did that help him?
Because key KAD leaders, like Daniel Arap Moi, Ronald Ngala, they actually shared Kenyatta's emphasis on ethnicity and his suspicion of redistribution. They were conservatives, pragmatists.
Like Masinde Muliro saying, an African socialist is by nature a capitalist.
Exactly. And Muliro himself, with his large farm and transport business, showed who was benefiting from Kenyatta's policies. These guys saw which way the wind was blowing and aligned themselves.
Allowing Kenyatta to reshape KNU.
Precisely. He could overhaul the party, sideline radicals, ensure conservatives won local elections, and he cracked down hard on Odinga's external support.
The threat to the Soviet and Chinese embassies.
Direct and blunt. Stop funding Odinga or you're out. And it worked. Odinga's funding dried up, weakening him considerably. It showed Kenyatta's absolute determination to centralize control and eliminate rivals.
Which inevitably leads to open conflict.
It had to. Odinga, feeling totally pushed out, frustrated by the authoritarianism and the economic policies, finally quits as vice president in April '66.
And forms his own party.
The Kenya People's Union, KPU, pledging itself to true African socialism, a direct challenge.
How did the government react?
Swiftly and brutally. They engineered the little general election of '66, forced all the MPs who'd defected to KPU to resign and fight for their seats again.
And KNU used its power to win most of those.
Overwhelmingly. State resources, pressure. It further cemented Kenyatta's control, and he attacked KPU publicly, called their ideology corrupt, against honest labor, painting them as lazy dreamers.
And the ethnic angle became more pronounced.
Definitely. Kenyatta's strategy was clearly to paint KPU as just a Luo party, Odinga's tribal base, not a national alternative. He pressured non-Luo MPs to ditch KPU and come back to KNU.
Which led to complaints from within KNU itself.
Yes, even Luo MPs still within KU, like Shilamaya and Bayonyango, started complaining publicly about Kikuyuized government departments, seeing Kenyatta's ethnic group dominating. Another Luo MP, Leonard Osalu Nilik, warned it could lead to blood. The ethnicization of politics was becoming dangerously explicit.
A pattern we see repeating later in Kenyan history.
Tragically, yes. Suppressing dissent often took on this ethnic dimension, and the harassment of KPU was relentless.
Especially around the 1968 local elections.
Systematically targeted. Bildad Kajia, a key KPU figure, arrested and jailed just for holding an unapproved meeting. Odinga stopped from traveling abroad. KPU rallies restricted.
Forcing them underground almost. Meetings at weddings and funerals.
Exactly, a telling sign of the repression. They squeezed Odinga's fundraising too, though Osuli Nalik Riley noted Odinga always seemed to find money somehow, making him financially resilient for a while.
But the overall goal was clear.
To completely cripple the opposition. Slaughtering the bulls, as the phrase went. To ensure no real political competition remained. #tagged the succession shadow in Mboya's assassination. Then, in May 1968, something happens that throws everything into uncertainty.
Kenyatta's health crisis.
Yes, he suffers a serious stroke while at the coast, and suddenly the question everyone's been avoiding who succeeds Menzies is unavoidable. It's front and center.
People rushed to his bedside.
Immediately. Mama and Gina, his wife, powerful figures like Charles Njonjo, the Attorney General, Daniel Arap Moi, the Vice President, triggering instant rumors that Kenyatta had died.
He recovered, though. Lived another 10 years.
He did, remarkably. But that stroke, that vulnerability, it changed the game. The behind-the-scenes struggle to succeed him, which had already started, now completely dominated politics, especially after the KPU was effectively crushed.
Who were the main contenders?
Well, James Gichuru was initially seen as a possibility, but his health was failing. So it really boiled down to two key players, Daniel Arap Moi and Tom Mboya.
Backed by different factions.
Powerful rival factions. But Kenyatta characteristically refused to name an heir, just met any talk of succession with an irritable rebuff.
Which just fueled the speculation and maneuvering.
Exactly. It intensified the covert and increasingly nasty struggle for power. It really foreshadowed that big man style of politics where proximity and loyalty to the leader trump everything else.
And during this time, Kenyatta's own style of rule becomes more personalized.
Very much so. Branch talks about personalized power. Kenyatta's provincial and district commissioners became his personal representatives, his chief lieutenants, the eye of his excellency everywhere.
Given significant power.
Huge power. Even chairing land boards, which were critical. And the baraza, the tradition of delegations bringing grievances directly to the president, that became a highly controlled ritual.
A way for ethnic groups to appeal directly to him.
Yes. It institutionalized what Branch calls the politics of recognition. Ethnic groups make their case directly to the top, bypassing formal policies. Kenyatta then shows his largesse, like giving a big check to Meru for a hospital, reinforcing his role as the ultimate source of favor.
So ethnicity becomes the main channel for political claims, rather than broad national policies.
That's the effect. And amidst all this, Tom Mboya is still trying to champion nationalism, still saying, we cannot build a nation if we are divided. We must rid ourselves of all forms of tribalism.
Almost swimming against the tide by this point.
It seems like it. Even Bildad Kajia, released from detention in '69, felt he couldn't rejoin KPU because he feared the backlash from his own Kikuyu community. The gap between the national ideal and the ethnic reality was becoming a chasm.
And this intense succession struggle, this personalized power, it culminates in tragedy.
Utter tragedy. The assassination of Tom Mboya on July 5th, 1969.
Shot dead in broad daylight.
In Nairobi, by Nashon Isaac Njenga, who allegedly asked Mboya that chilling question, why don't you go after the big man? Implying orders from higher up.
And the reaction was immediate and violent.
Instant chaos, anti-government, anti-Kikuyu slogans erupted. A Kikuyu priest reportedly forced out of Mboya's hospital ward. Mboya's own bodyguards seen attacking Kikuyu mourners. Even Moi's car was stoned when he tried to see the body. Raw, explosive anger.
It wasn't just grief, it was ethnic fury boiling over.
Completely. And the Requiem Mass at the Holy Family Basilica, it just descended into a massive riot.
50,000 people.
At least, surrounding Kenyatta's car, shouting KPU slogans, throwing stones, then the security forces wading in with tear gas, batons, shops smashed, people killed, at least 8 confirmed dead, maybe many more, scores injured.
Turning Mboya into a martyr.
For the Luo community, absolutely, he became a martyr and ethnic ethnic hero. That immediate, violent public reaction, it showed just how much resentment had built up, how fragile the nation's unity really was. It was like a pressure cooker exploding.
And the aftermath? Conspiracy theories flew.
Instantly, the government tried to deflect, pointed fingers at KPU, even at Charles Rubia.
The Kikuyu politician who'd crossed Kenyatta.
Right. He seemed a convenient scapegoat, the perfect patsy, having annoyed Kenyatta and Njonjo over the Nairobi mayorship.
But diplomats saw it differently.
British and U.S. diplomats became pretty certain that the real plot originated much closer to Kenyatta, with Kikuyu ministers in his inner circle. Njonjo, they suspected, more than probably had a hand.
And Njenga, the assassin, never implicated anyone else.
Refused to name names, just hinted darkly at a bigger conspiracy. Even the state prosecutor apparently admitted privately it looked like Njenga was an agent for others.
It's chilling. Suggests politics have become criminalized at the highest levels.
It really does. Powerful figures potentially orchestrating murder with impunity, hiding behind cover stories, a desperately dangerous path for the young nation.
And this paranoia led to more overt displays of ethnic power, the oathing ceremonies.
Yes, in the wake of Mboya's murder, these Kikuyu oathing ceremonies became widespread, echoes of Mau Mau, but this time aimed at unifying the Kikuyu to hold on to power amidst fear and suspicion.
Causing alarm elsewhere.
Huge alarm across the country. Fears that the Kikuyu were preparing to fight to stay dominant, possibly with state complicity in organizing the ceremonies. Churches condemned it. Non-Kikuyu MPs warned of resistance. Tensions were incredibly high.
How did Kenyatta respond to all this challenge?
With force. He doubled down, toured the provinces launching virulent attacks on the KPU, and then came the infamous visit to Kisumu, Odinga's heartland, in October '69.
To open the Soviet-funded hospital, a provocative move.
Extremely. And reports say he gave his bodyguards explicit orders beforehand. Shoot to kill when the first stone is thrown.
And trouble erupted.
Immediately, he was met with boos, KPU slogans, his car was stoned. He confronted Odinga publicly, right there, threatened him. If it was not for my respect for you, Odinga, I would put you in prison now.
Just raw confrontation.
Absolutely. The crowd was incensed, heckling, clashing with KNU supporters. As Kenyatta tried to leave, more stones were thrown. Crowds surged into the road.
And the bodyguards opened fire.
They did, into the crowd. At least 8 people confirmed killed, but again, rumors and some reports claimed tens or hundreds, scores wounded. It was a massacre.
And the final crackdown followed immediately.
Almost instantly. Kenyatta ordered Odinga arrested, detained, all the remaining KPU MPs, other leaders, rounded up. And then the KPU was banned outright. Finished.
The end of multi-party politics for a long time.
For decades, it was the definitive consolidation of Kenyatta's authoritarian rule. The final, brutal shattering of that transient unity they started with just 6 years earlier. #Hag outro.
So that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've covered a huge amount of ground looking at those first 6 incredibly turbulent years of independent Kenya.
From the highest hopes of self-rule, Madaraka, down to, well, political assassinations, deep divisions, and state repression. It's quite a trajectory.
A painful one in many ways.
Yeah.
And what we've unpacked today, drawing on Daniel Branch's work, really highlights some key things, doesn't it?
It really does. That initial transient unity based only on opposing colonialism couldn't hold. It fractured almost immediately into these fierce ideological battles over land, over the economy.
And we saw how Cold War pressures from outside played a huge role, often pushing things towards more authoritarianism.
While internally, those power struggles became increasingly ethnicized. It was a dangerous combination.
Leading to this rise of personalized power under Kenyatta and the really brutal crushing of dissent by 1969.
Yeah. All those elements were clearly visible in just those first 6 years.
Which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener.
Go on.
Well, in those early years, the argument was often framed as a choice. Either strong central control for unity or chaos and ethnic division.
Right, that was definitely the narrative pushed by those in power.
But by 1969, the very methods used to enforce that unity, cracking down on opposition, consolidating power, playing the ethnic card, didn't they actually end up deepening the very divisions they were supposedly preventing?
It certainly looks that way, a real paradox. The tools used to forge unity ended up seemingly hardening the lines of division.
So what does that tell us about the challenge of nation building? Especially when the tools of power themselves can be used to divide just as easily as unite. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the long shadow these foundational years cast over Kenya's future and the challenges it still grapples with.
It absolutely does. A powerful question to reflect on. And that's our deep dive for today.